Roger looked only at his wife. She was pale and drained. Her beautiful eyes conveyed fear and a clear plea. Now only her face, swollen with tears, did not express contempt and hatred for him. The courtroom was silent and anxious as everyone awaited the verdict. The eyes of those present were fixed upon the judge who was about to pronounce his verdict. There was no one in the courtroom except for Julia, who did not wish the worst for him now. And there was no one in the whole world for Roger, except for his beloved wife. Throughout the entire last court session, Roger did not look towards the family of the deceased old man, but he knew he would only see hatred in their eyes. Roger himself would hate someone who killed a member of his family. In the eyes of all present, he was seen as a monster who had killed the old man and fled without even trying to help him. Roger's mother raised him alone. She died before he turned 10 years old, and he grew up in the village with his grandmother, who also passed away 5 years after his mother. How painful it is to see all this hatred in people's eyes, thought Roger, as he sat on the defendant's bench. But it would be 1,000 times harder for me to see my mother and grandmother killed by grief. It's good that they don't see this shame now. 4 years, pronounced the judge as the verdict. The judge's words hit him like a heavy blacksmith's hammer on his head. Julia cried out loud, and the people in the courtroom were dissatisfied. Someone shouted about vigilante justice, and someone demanded a longer sentence. And Roger thought only of the fact that he would not see his baby come into the world, would not meet Julia at the maternity hospital, would not walk with her and the baby in the public garden, and would not teach the baby to take his first steps. Julia, everything will be fine. Think about the baby. Don't get nervous, he shouted when she tried to break through to him. On the way out of the hall, he heard her parting words. Roger will wait for you. He was ready to do anything for Julia, but he knew that clearly, and now he accepted the punishment instead of her. She definitely wouldn't have been able to handle it. And I'm a man, I'm strong, and I'll endure everything. I will endure everything. I have to endure. I will return, and we will be together again. We will have a baby, as she said. I will only think about them, my beloved Julia and the baby. Everything else doesn't matter. These thoughts filled his head, not giving him the opportunity to think about his own fate. And his fate at the moment was very unenviable. After receiving 5 years of general regime for hitting a pedestrian, Roger lost everything dear to him. The scariest thing about this situation was that all the people, as it seemed to him now, hated and cursed him, and all his fault was only that he loved and pitied Julia very much. The first night in prison, where he was brought closer to the evening, passed without any special incidents, although his imagination had already painted a horrible picture of prison cruelty and lawlessness. To some extent, Roger was lucky. The prisoners with whom he ended up in the same cell were mostly ordinary people who had violated the law out of carelessness or stupidity. Lying on a hard mattress in the cell and staring into the darkness of the night, he replayed everything that had happened to him over the past few months. Roger remembered that terrible night when he was waiting for Julia to come home from a party with her friends, and was very worried that she was not answering his calls. It felt like it had just happened yesterday. Roger saw his wife's trembling figure standing on the doorstep that night. She looked crazy and smelled of alcohol. Stammering, she tried to explain something to him. Roger, it's not my fault. I don't understand how he ended up on the road. Yes, I had a little to drink at the party, but I didn't want to leave my car there, and he jumped out of the darkness, and I didn't understand where he came from. He remained lying there. I didn't stop. I was scared. Roger couldn't understand what Julia was trying to say to him at the time. It wasn't until later that the meaning of her words finally reached him. Julia had killed a man. This thought didn't allow him to concentrate on anything else. Roger, what will happen to me now? His wife cried and grabbed his hands. And if he died, am I a murderer? Oh no. She looked like a child trying to find protection from someone stronger and adult. All thoughts in Roger's head were tangled in one huge knot, and he could not understand how to unravel it until Julia said just 2 words. I'm pregnant. Roger, what will happen to me? I can't go to jail. I just wanted to tell you tonight that I'm pregnant, and we'll have a baby. After hearing this, the knot in Roger's head unraveled by itself, and the solution to the problem became so obvious. Calm down now. Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant before? I wouldn't have let you go to that party. Why did you drink? Roger hugged his wife. If they find your car, I'll tell the police that I was driving tonight and I hit a man. Julia didn't try to dissuade him. She just cried. Roger ran to the garage and inspected the car. There were traces of blood, a dent on the hood, and a cracked bumper. In a hurry, without thinking, he tried to wipe all the prints that Julia could have left in the car with a rag. He wiped the steering wheel, door handles, and then, fidgeting and nervous, he started grabbing with his hands all the protruding objects in the car, trying to leave as many of his fingerprints as possible. When the police arrived at their doorstep, Roger already had a clearly formulated proof of his guilt. He didn't even intend to deny that it was his car that hit the man to death that night. Julia pretended to be surprised in front of the police, saying that she didn't even suspect what had happened. She threw herself into her husband's arms when he was taken away. Roger, what have you done? How could you? She reproached her husband so convincingly that Roger himself began to gradually believe that the death of the old man was solely on his conscience. What? The boy can't sleep? Roger heard an old voice from the pitch-black darkness of the cell. I couldn't get to sleep at first either. Don't worry, you'll get used to it. It turned out that his night interlocutor was a strong old man named Richard. Roger told Richard what brought him to prison, not hiding his real story. Yeah, I messed up big time too. Richard wanted to vent to Roger about his soul. I've been sitting here for 6 months, and for what? And that scumbag I barely touched. It wouldn't really have hurt to knock him out. I worked as a ranger. Some scoundrels started wreaking havoc in my forest. Whether they were poachers or just idiots having fun, I don't know. But I couldn't let them destroy the beauty of nature. Idiots having fun? I don't know. They shot a moose once, and the fawn was left without a mother. It would have been fine if they were just hunting for food, but instead they were causing damage. They shot swans on the lake and burned squirrels for entertainment. So John, my assistant, and I decided to track them down. John was still inexperienced. He looked very much like my late son. I protected him as if he were my own. And those wretches fired at him when he chased after them. I couldn't hold back. I fired once, twice. Who knew the pellets would hit one guy in the vulnerable spot? John was seriously injured and those scumbags didn't even flinch. But now I'm the one who got sentenced. That wounded parasite turned out to be the prosecutor's son. They claimed they were just having innocent fun with their friends. And I, the villain, wanted to kill them. And here I am. Don't be afraid, Roger. There are other people living here too. Somehow we'll get through this and stand by each other, through thick and thin. No one will be able to scare us. And so Roger started serving his sentence. He got used to it over time. Julia called him and passed on messages promising to come visit him. Roger asked her about their child. He was eager to know whether they were having a boy or a girl. He couldn't wait for their meeting to put his hand on his beloved's belly and feel their baby kicking. He came up with names and eagerly told Richard about the smart son or little princess he and Julia would have. But one day his wife gave him unpleasant news. You won't have a son or daughter. I lost the baby a long time ago. I just didn't want to upset you. Julia's cold, almost indifferent voice washed over him like cold water. Julia, how could you not tell me? When did this happen? Roger couldn't gather his thoughts when a cruel suspicion suddenly crept into his mind. Julia, have you ever been pregnant? Think what you want if you don't believe me. His wife responded sharply and hung up. Since then, Julia didn't write or call him and wouldn't answer his calls. Roger couldn't find peace, blaming himself for asking his wife such a cruel, heartless question that undoubtedly hurt a woman who had lost her child. So when Richard was released from prison, Roger asked him to go to his home first thing. First, find out how his beloved Julia is doing. He wrote her a letter, begging for forgiveness for his cruel accusation, expressing his love for her and asking her to at least let him know how she was doing. A couple of days later, Roger heard Richard's voice on the phone. Listen, son, don't do anything stupid. I don't know how to tell you this, but your wife seems to have left a long time ago. The house is empty. I asked the neighbors. They say they haven't seen her in 2 years. Apparently she's moved to the capital. That's not the worst part. The most important thing is that she's alive and well. What? Thank you, Richard. I'll find her myself when I get out. She's really angry with me, it seems. 2 years had passed. Roger stood in front of a boarded-up, abandoned house, shooing away a nosy neighbor with annoyance. Don't make up stories, ma'am. You're a well-known fantasist. You see, Roger, she fooled you. Everyone here knows that. As soon as they put you in jail, she immediately started an affair with some guy from the city. Go to Megan, her friend from the grocery store. She knows exactly what happened. Listening to the slightly frightened Megan, his wife's former classmate, Roger began to realize that all these years he had been a complete fool. You can't blame her, Roger. You went to jail and she met a guy from the capital on the internet. He came to see her in his fancy car and proposed to her. Why should she sit here alone in the middle of nowhere? Said Megan. What a wretch, Roger muttered through his teeth. I won't look for Julia anymore. She has little kids now. Twins were born last year. I won't hurt her, will I? The chatty friend asked, frightened. I've had enough of your Julia, muttered Roger, his head spinning, his throat constricted. He spat loudly and left, slamming the door loudly. Days and nights merged into one endless chaos for Roger, who couldn't distinguish between days and weeks in his drunken stupor. He recalled Richard's stories and felt like a wild animal, shot in the flank by poachers and losing all desire to live and fight. The realization that the one he had ruined his life for had betrayed him, cutting all the threads that connected him to this life, left him, killing himself with alcohol every day. Is anyone home? A high-pitched female voice came from under the window. Roger didn't want to answer. He had nothing left to buy alcohol with today, and he was in a terrible mood. He just lay there staring at the ceiling, hoping that his splitting headache would shut off his consciousness in one moment and he wouldn't think, suffer, or live anymore. Hey Roger, are you home? Someone called persistently under the window. Roger reluctantly pulled himself up to the open window. He looked into the blue eyes of some girl. What do you want? He grumbled irritably. I'm Elaine, your neighbor. I've been wanting to visit you. You're my neighbor, but you never come to visit me or invite me over. Elaine? The one who used to beg for apples from my grandma all the time? Roger tried to remember. That was a long time ago, Elaine laughed. You might as well remember the time of the dinosaurs. It's been almost 20 years. Wow, you've grown up, neighbor. Do you have something to drink by any chance? Roger decided to take advantage of the girl's friendliness. Elaine became serious and said in a completely different tone, You've had enough to drink. All the neighbors don't know how to help you. I know you're grieving, but it's no reason to destroy yourself. I'll bring you some hot broth and mint tea. After that, I'll make some herbal tea for you. My grandmother taught me how to help people cope with alcohol addiction. I won't leave you alone. You'll drink some tea now, get some rest, and then we'll go for a walk in the forest. It's so beautiful there. The birds are singing, and you'll forget about your troubles. And so it happened. Elaine took it upon herself to save Roger. She had loved him since childhood, but back then, the age difference was too great. And the guy didn't pay any attention to the feisty, funny neighbor girl. But she always remembered him, and couldn't watch quietly as he killed himself with alcohol. Every visit from Elaine was like a ray of light in Roger's dark and stuffy life. She brought joy and light into his home, dispelling all the gloomy thoughts with her laughter. Roger changed that day. He quit drinking, got a job, and seriously thought about proposing to Elaine. Only one thing stopped his thoughts of marrying her. Elaine's parents, and even the girl herself, wouldn't want to tie their fate to a former prisoner. But why do you need me, Elaine? I was in prison. He tried to talk to the girl. I'm not stupid or blind. Everyone in the village knows who your wife was. And from the first day, everyone only discussed how you covered for her and went to jail instead. You're a very good person, and I love you. Elaine's words stirred up such a storm of feelings in Roger's soul that he grabbed the girl in his arms and started spinning her around the room. How I love you, Elaine. Roger stopped, put the girl down on the floor, and looked into her eyes. He asked, "Will you marry me?" "I've been waiting for this for more than 10 years. She laughed happily and replied, "Of course I will be your wife." Roger was finally happy again. They began preparing for the wedding, and Roger decided to find Richard and invite him to be the godfather. However, when he tried to call Richard, there was no answer. Roger remembered the name of the village where his prison friend was from, and on his first day off, he went with his bride to search for the old gamekeeper. In the village, everyone knew Richard, and Roger easily found his dilapidated house on the edge of the forest. When they entered his house, Roger immediately realized that something was wrong. The old man was lying in bed, not even turning his head to greet them. Richard had a high fever and was breathing heavily. It was clear that he needed urgent medical attention. The couple took him to the district hospital, and while the doctors cured his advanced pneumonia, Roger didn't leave his side and sat by his bed for days. They decided with Elaine to take Richard with them. When his life was out of danger, they brought him to their village. After the wedding, Roger began building a big house next to the one he had lived in with his grandmother as a boy. Elaine was expecting their first child, and Roger was overjoyed. Richard had fully recovered and now tried to help them in every way he could. One day, Megan, a classmate and friend of Julia, came to Roger while he was at work. She said, "Roger, I didn't dare come to your house, but we need to talk." Oh, how we need to. What Megan told him left Roger completely confused. It turned out that his ex-wife wanted to come back to him and asked Megan to help get rid of Elaine. Roger was shocked and asked, "Megan, did you tell her that I was married?" Megan replied, "Yes, I told her everything. But Julia is sure that you still love her, that Elaine is no rival for her, and that you will forgive and take her back." I can't believe my ears. You told me that she has a beautiful, wealthy husband and children. Why does she need me? Well, Roger, let me tell you a secret. Julia's husband caught her with their driver, like in a bad joke. He returned from a business trip at the wrong time, probably on purpose. He had long suspected Julia of having affairs on the side. Well, you understand, with children in daycare and a husband at work. She got bored. In general, her husband caught them red-handed in their bedroom and threw her out of the house, literally. She's staying with some friends now. Her husband hired lawyers and wants to get custody of the children. She doesn't seem to object. Am I her backup plan or something? Roger, my only intention is to warn you. Your Elaine is no match for Julia, and she's a beauty. She always has been, and now she's a real socialite from the capital. Well, let her stay there in the capital. Did her driver leave her too? He disowned her as well, lost his job, and ran off somewhere. In any case, I have passed on the news to you, so wait for her to visit. But don't even think about accepting her. I won't accept her, so just tell her. I'll tell her, but you know how she is. She makes her own decisions. 3 weeks had passed. The small but friendly family had developed a habit of drinking tea. During one of these tea parties, they heard the gate creaking. Julia was standing on the path leading to the garden with suitcases in her hands. "Roger, I'm back!" She pretended to cheerfully shout at Roger. Richard was the first to stand up from the table, while Roger and Elaine, shocked, were trying to figure out what to say and do. "Sweetheart, let's go. I'll accompany you to the gate." "Go in peace and don't bother good people," said Richard firmly but politely to the uninvited guest. "You don't understand. This is my home. I used to live here. I have nowhere else to go now. My husband kicked me out. He took away my children and threw me out onto the street. Do you understand? He just got jealous of me out of nowhere and accused me of cheating on him. But I made a mistake, Roger. I just made a very serious mistake. If you thought you could just appear in my life again, you were wrong. Appear in Roger's life like this. We won't let you manipulate him again. Please, this is the last time I'm telling you, and I'm not joking. I already went to jail for shooting one scumbag, and I won't hesitate to do it again for you. I'm itching to beat you up. I'm not afraid of it anymore," Richard warned. Frightened, Julia picked up her suitcases and rushed to the exit. Roger and Elaine looked at the old man with amazement, and he shrugged, smiled, and asked, "What's wrong? Am I wrong? Let's have some tea or it'll get completely cold." And they all laughed together.